Nobody's business is so complex that this can't be done. This is the big picture.
G'day everybody, Marty Lewis here, Orb Services, here with Zac Goodman from Mortar Finance. Zac, give everybody a wave, say g'day.
G'day.
Mate, thanks for coming to have a chat with us. We've had a bit of a chat about hospitality, but we want to talk about construction now. Construction, mining, sort of, I guess more, maybe even some larger tradies going to fall into some similar categories here. What are some of the things that you're seeing in the industry at the moment, and what should a construction business be doing to be at the forefront of this and giving themselves the best chance to come through this with the minimal kind of damage?
Yeah, it's a good question, mate. And for the most part, the conversations I've been having with my clients is that they're not overly impacted at the moment. They've been considered an essential service, which they absolutely are, mate. They're pivotal to the continuation of production domestically, and for our mining sectors, our global impact on export. So they are industries which are finding themselves still working through these challenging times. But I think that more than anything, the conversations are going to come around to two. One is, what's the perception that these guys are having on their client base? And it doesn't matter if the clients is mum and dad that they're changing, light fittings for in their own homes, or larger sites and your major contractors, Hutchies, right? It doesn't matter who your client is. The perception that you're having on them now in how you're acting responsibly, whether it be through wearing face masks when you travel together in clumps, whether it be decisions you're making on hand sanitizers when you arrive to site, having your consideration to working responsibly now is important. And then, from a lending perspective, mate, which is predominantly what we're working with our clients, is how do we most effectively make capital decisions in our business? We're not seeing as large a CapEx expenditure at the moment. We're not seeing people investing into utes or into expansion. And I think for the most part, that's not a bad decision. Where we're going to see the capital needed in the businesses is truly cash flow, is these construction companies and mining companies that have large debtor books, and those debtor books are going to grow, have pressure on their creditors, and have really large labour forces. So we need to think about how we're going to get access to capital, when we're going to get access to that capital, and make sure that capital is protected. Because the biggest risk I see at the moment with the construction industry still operating is who they're operating for. So if we've got large debtor books and a construction company or a company of the like gets an overdraft or gets a big credit card or gets debtor finance in order to help them facilitate that cash, and the person that they facilitated that cash flow for falls over, it's going to be a massive impact to the business. So I want people to start to think about maybe changing the way that they operate their business to safeguard that. There's a few ways to do that. But mate, I might ask you if you've come across any things in your conversations in how you'd protect that, and operations that they can start to think about now to deploy their labour and deploy decisions in their business to be stronger during this time.
Yeah, well, I don't look at cash at the same level of detail that you do, but it is obviously a focus for me working with somebody, because you've got to know how much you got, what are you playing with, because if you don't have that, you're just on a whim and a prayer, and that's no good. So one of the simple and easy things that I come back to is, what's your accounts payable and accounts receivable looking like? What's your debtors, as you say, debtors and creditors? What's that looking like? Because in construction, it's very, very easy for that to end up with, you've got credit terms on purchases and you've got credit terms on invoicing as well. So depending on what's happening there, if the flow of revenue cuts out periodically, that can have a massive effect, because you may all of a sudden you've got these huge debtors coming due that you are now trying to have to scramble and find money for. So whether you're looking at, whether it's debtor, speaking to somebody like yourself to look at debtor finance, whatever options you have there, but making sure that you're in a position where if the tap was to turn off on your revenue tomorrow, you are going to be okay. You're going to be able to operate and maintain some kind, or what, if you're not going to be okay, what can you do? Because construction will be one of the last ones to go. Like medical will be the last, that's obviously going to maintain. But construction will be one of the last ones to go, because construction, mining, you're talking about significant hit into the Australian economy, employment, all those kind of things. They're going to try and keep that happening for as long as it goes. Beyond looking at your money, my main thing is what you're saying, the operational process. Social distancing on a construction site is, I'm not going to say impossible, but it's certainly difficult, So whilst you can't do everything perfectly, what can you do? And my suggestion would there be looking at what can you do around split shifts and then cleaning between those shifts. So if you've got 15 blokes working for you, how can you start to split some of those shifts up? Because if you have an outbreak in your team, are you able to isolate a part of your team and keep the other part operating? And that comes back to what you were saying about how do you actually communicate all of that? What sort of processes do you have in place? How are you communicating with that to your client and being actually responsible about what's going on?
How do you communicate that to your team as well without getting this unnecessary panic in your team? So do you have some processes in place for this type of industry where they're so heavily labour heavy and they're also regularly spread? We're not often doing stuff on one site. So do you have any tips on how we can have that conversation with our team without sending panic?
Yeah, and look, that comes into, I guess, a leadership conversation, which is obviously important. And I'm saying the same thing to everybody else. It's just important to be honest about it. People aren't expecting you to have all of the answers. Like if I'm the site foreman or the team leader or whatever I am in that situation, I'm just playing it as best I can, being as responsible as we can with the information that we have now. I'm always a believer that it's important to give your staff as much information as possible rather than as little as possible. So giving people as much information as you can about where you're at, what you're thinking, why you're making the decisions that you're making, and how you're trying to protect not only the staff, but also the business. And so that because protecting the business is protecting the staff. If you don't protect the business and the business has to shut down, you haven't protected the staff. So you've got to do both sides of that and make that really a priority in your conversation. The great thing that construction have is toolboxes where the communication frequency and the flow of meetings is pretty frequent. It's very common to have that. So just focus in on your day-to-day, what's the latest, how are you making it work, and why you're making the decisions that you're making. Talk to me, we're talking about construction hanging around. Do you think that we may see a shutdown in construction? What are your thoughts? And I know that you and I don't have a crystal ball here, but what are your thoughts here? Will construction potentially shut down? And if it does, what do you think might happen there?
The immediate response is it depends how much control we have over the spread of the virus. So I think that what the government's trying to do, and we hear the terminology a lot, flatten the curve, and for all intents and purposes, we seem to be doing a good job at that. I think if we can continue to flatten the curve without destruction of our economy under full shutdown conditions, we won't see a huge shutdown. But don't get me wrong, I do think that even under that provision, we will see some business and some construction industries start to hurt, particularly your sole traders, particularly that services a domestic economy. For the pure fact that consumer confidence right now, and this is going on last month's data, and I'd imagine it would have worsened, is worse than the early 90s pandemic that we had. So the consumer confidence at the moment is really poor. So if we're looking at people wanting to do building project homes, if we're looking at the construction industry that is looking to do small time renovations, even the likes of electricians and plumbers that are doing domestic work, that's the part of the construction company which I think will have the first impact to any type of reaction to the market, which is what we will see. I think we will see that. In terms of the large-scale construction, the large-scale civil works, mining shutdown, I think it would have to be a full shutdown governed by government. Other than that, what I'm seeing from sites at the moment is just this really specific requirements around quarantining, making sure that you've got measures in place, again, to be showing that you're responsible. Gut feel, opinion only, is that won't shut down. We will see that continue as an industry pushing forward. Will there be some impact? Yes. in terms of that, though, I think that the major impact there is once you're off this contract, what happens with the next one?
Yeah.
So I feel in that civil construction mining sector, it's actually the risk is what happens when you finish this current contract? So that could be 3 months, that could be 6 months away, depending on the contract size you're working on. But I really think that we need to consider where we're finding the next work and looking at it now, not leaving the tenders for 3 months, not leaving the tenders, or not even waiting for tenders or contracts to come up. We need to be chasing that and creating our blue sky funnel immediately. I think that as a general comment, the rebound to this is going to be massive, and the rebound to this is going to be stimulated by government spending. So I'm reasonably comfortable that as long as these big businesses make decisions now, there will be big contracts to service. It is that smaller end of the construction industry, your smaller teams, your framers, your roofers, they're the ones that are going to be hurting both now first, and I think in the recovery. So from that standpoint, capital, and we've spoken about it before, but that effective use of capital to make sure you're not borrowing money to just cover losses is going to be incredibly important.
Yeah.
So if we consider that, and in line with that thought, have you got any ideas on what businesses can do that when they finally get their hands on some sort of stimulus package that is out there, or some sort of lending that is out there, what can they do with that money to make sure it's used effectively and we see returns on it, not just covering losses?
Yeah, we talked about this for hospitality, and it's effectively if we're talking about civil construction, for example, we've effectively got the opposite problem where they have even less time, because not only are they trying to manage their day-to-day activities as they were pre-COVID-19, they're trying to manage them under the conditions of COVID-19, social distancing, putting practice in place. So the environment there is going to be very heavily stressed in terms of what's happening. It's as we're on the same page. Never a good idea to borrow money to go backwards, to just service going backwards. You're better off to go into hibernation. The one big opportunity that I see is in the labour market. Labour is one of the it's a huge expense for us to take a civil construction company, huge expense, and there are going to be cutbacks in industries all around it. Is there an opportunity for you to recruit some real talent into your team that has come from maybe a different industry but has been turned down in their industry? They've been laid off, wound back, whatever. If you have an opportunity here to recruit and find some really solid talent and help you through that time. So the one thing, if I can put my hand, and I always say, invest in your staff. You have to invest in your staff and training and making sure that they're up to speed, because they're the difference between operating efficiently and having a 12% profit margin, or operating inefficiently and having a 3% profit margin. So work on that, invest into your staff, and make sure you give them back there. There is obviously, there's large capital write-offs and things like that are available, which is more your area of expertise. But I'd be looking to put yourself in a very stable position and make sure, as you said, that those next contracts are coming up. Is now a great time to bring a software team in and look at systems and processes and how all that works, what's going on there, and looking for opportunities in those areas.
It's a really interesting comment you make, as treating your labour as an investment. And if I was to take something away from that, we've helped a couple of civil companies at the moment, or looking at a couple of civil companies at the moment, to do the job support growth loan that's effectively interest-free for the first 12 months within a 10-year amortization. And they're actually looking at engaging that loan to deploy capital into their labour force, which is strange in concept, but the grant itself is there to make sure that businesses that have been impacted by COVID-19 continue business operation and continue to engage labour. Now, a growth in their labour force because of that money that demonstrates a really niche opportunity for them to borrow money at zero return, almost anyway, next to zero capital return requirements, and deploy that into their business to improve their margins on construction from 3% to 12% because they've got a really good project manager, or a really good estimator, or a really good person who's able to build relationships and create job flow, which they didn't previously have. So, even these construction companies that are still operating today, if they deploy capital in their business, utilize it smart, and do it through the likes of the job support growth loans or the bank finance federal-backed unsecured job loans, it provides them a really niche opportunity that I don't think they've seen in 50 years. So,
right. Yeah, there's a lot of talk about stimulus packages, and there's obviously going to be some red tape around it and whatnot. But let's just take, I'm a civil construction company. I've got 15 blokes working for me, mainly servicing sort of major road projects and that kind of stuff. What opportunities exist for me with getting capital and having access to cash?
Yeah, so there's a couple of, I'm going to answer that in a couple of different ways. One is, we really need to understand the working capital and the cash flow requirements of these companies. And It's funny because they change consistently depending on projects. Each project they tender will have progress claims, or they'll have quantity surveyor requirements, and they'll have different payment terms on that. So they do change, but I want these civil construction companies to consider, upon the rebound, what cash do we need to have, and where do we find that shortfall? Because the rebound in these industries are going to be so heavily driven by government spending. So we want these businesses to either reserve cash now or create funding structures and put them in place now for when they need them in the rebound. We need to give some thought to that. Directly in terms of the government stimulus packages or what's available, I mean, the natural ones are to look at these lending again, the ones that need to be repaid, which is your bank ones, 3-year loan terms. The cost of capital there is anywhere from 4.5% to 7%, depending on the bank. 6 months interest, 6 months no repayment, and then repayments over 2.5 years. A really good opportunity for these projects to engage in projects you might not have previously been able to engage in because of deployment of capital or deployment of labour. You can now do those projects at margin. The other options are, the state stimulus package for Queensland-based businesses. That's a 10-year payback period. That's your job support loan growth loan. Again, $250,000, 10-year payback. Interest kicks in after year one, but is very small and is only interest only for 2 years. So a really nice little opportunity to continue operation or continue to employ. Outside of that, we've got this concept at the moment that for all businesses, labour is going to be somewhere between 30% or 20% discount, right up to we're seeing 90% discount, because we've got our withholding tax PAYG benefits that were announced within the stimulus. We've got our job keeper at $1,500 for those businesses that have reduced their revenue by 30% because of COVID-19. There's quite a lot of stimulus out there, which might not seem like it's capital initially, but when you think about it as such a large cost saving, it's going to create capital opportunity, and you need to use that with the same concepts, the same theory as if we were borrowing money to be repaid. We need to use it effectively, and we need to use it in a way that's going to return you money, whether that be immediately through revenue, whether that be through future efficiencies and productivity, so margin, or whether that be through diversification and growth opportunities. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, well, like I said, there's a ton of opportunities out there, and that's why people like you exist, to help people navigate that minefield and say, okay, this is where we're at, this is what's going on, this is how we're going to make the best of it for each individual circumstances. Because, my circumstances as that company with 15 staff, I've got landscaping staff, is different to the guy who's got 20 staff as an electrical contractor. It's different to the guy who's on site doing the concreting. Like there's different scenarios and individuals everywhere. But the thing that I take out of what you just said is that there are a ton of great opportunities. And the thing that I'm thinking as we're having this conversation is that there is a potential real opportunity here for somebody who's on the fringe, maybe just getting their first, sort of civil contract major works for, a Hutchies or a Lend-Lease or somebody like that. They're just starting to step up into that tier 2, tier 1 kind of contractor state. There's a fantastic opportunity here for you to get the capital that you need to be able to level up your business and become one of those contractors rather than a tier 2, tier 3, home resi kind of contractor. If you're on that fringe and thinking that, okay, if you're on that fringe and you're in a position, a strongish financial position, but you need capital to go bigger, there's some tremendous opportunity out there for you. And quite likely, as you mentioned, and you know, I don't have a crystal ball, neither do you, unfortunately. Would have seen this one coming. But civil construction is going to be, and mining are going to be those things that government pour money into to get the economy back going again. That's going to be their, you know, that's the 101s. They're going to pour money into civil construction to create projects and create jobs for people. There's got to be contractors to service that. So if you're on the fringe, there could be a really good opportunity here for you to get the capital that you need to grow your team and your resources and your profession and your skill set to be able to become one of those contractors and get in the mix for that.
Man, I couldn't agree more. It's a brilliant little summary, and I think it leads to a really nice way to finish this conversation, which is to throw to you and go, if you are in that boat, and if you are one of these companies that, you know, has decided to go from a crew of 2 to a crew of 8, or, you know, grown from a crew of 8 to a crew of 15, and you see this as an opportunity to take the next step in terms of your business, and we're able to get access to some capital to do that, mate, let me ask you, what's a few things that you can give as advice to these businesses to make sure that they spend the time on, so that when they do invest into that decision to grow, they can grow effectively and grow sustainably?
Yeah, well, there's a few things that rattle around in my head straight away, but it all comes back to not wasting it. It's one thing, growth hurts. Growing fast can be just as bad as, just as painful and cause just as many problems as not growing at all. So if you think that you got 3 staff and you're going to grow to 10 staff overnight, there is, on a positive side of things, there's a great opportunity there for you to get labor and get quality staff. Everybody's challenge is getting quality people. You know, a month ago, everybody was Friday and can't wait for a weekend. Now everybody wants to work. So you've got an opportunity to get good, talented staff. That's the first piece that's really exciting. So that's going to be a positive thing for you. Recruit well and get good staff. But the bigger piece that I come back to is you've got to have your operational systems and processes in place, because if you go from 3 staff, what worked at 3 staff won't work with 10 or 15 staff. So, and if you go to 10 or 15 staff with the systems and processes and infrastructure in your own business as to how to run your business, you're going to be in a world of pain, and 15 people is going to feel like 10 times the headache that it should be. So yes, there's a great opportunity there, but come back and look at your operational processes. How does your system, the mechanics, I just call it the mechanics of your business, how does the mechanics of your business work from the point of onboarding, role, responsibility, who does what in what place to make the whole machine work? Because you may get an estimator, an admin person, all this support that you never had before, but you've got to be able to give them role, responsibility, and direction so that they can actually execute something and provide value for you on that point. So make sure that my number one tip comes back to make sure that you've got the operational processes in your business and the structure there to support the much larger volume of work and people that you're going to be looking after.
It's a good point. I mean, on that point, the biggest mistake that I see businesses, construction businesses, create when they try and grow is they don't price for the growth. They still price when they're a sole trader running around in a ute, and they never seem to really have a grasp on covering their fixed cost base, stimulating margin for the initial sale of the product, or even really, jumping on site and working through the processes of what is a variation and how do we charge for a variation, and what is that honest conversation with our client up front so that we know that we can build in margin on our variations, Yeah. So that's where I find the biggest mistake, mate. Do you mind sharing quickly where your biggest mistake you find in this industry is in their growth appetite?
I would say that it's what I'd second what you say in terms of labor costing. So, and estimating for the factors that are come along. So you go to 15 staff, you're going to start to incur payroll tax and things like that. Things that you haven't had to worry about as a small-time operator. Your fixed expenses are going to go up from a point of insurances, liabilities, all that kind of stuff. And that eats into your margin for your staff. So not to mention you start to go into EBA contract agreements and all that kind of stuff. So you've got to pay you guys more and your rates change. So having somebody and get somebody with the experience to know how to negotiate those rates, because your rates on your staff, your labor, in a lot of the scenarios that I'm thinking of, you know, from your landscapers to your concreters to your sparkies, a lot of your profit is going to be on your labor rate. So if you mess up your labor rate, your skin, you know, and there's going to be a bit of competition out there for it. So making sure that you get that labor percentage right and looking at what's going on there so that you're actually in a capacity to be profitable when you get on there. You know, take 10 staff working 50 hours a week, that's 500 hours a week that you're billing. If there's a 5% improvement there, that's 25, you know, you're a couple of grand ahead a week to be doing that if you can get a 5% improvement. So it just comes down to maths at scale and what you're doing with your team, making sure that labor rate is where it needs to be. But,
yeah, cool.
Mate, I'm trying to think of a good question to finish off for you, mate. What's the from a finance point of view, what's a takeaway that you would give somebody? What's a piece of advice from Water Finance and Zac Goodman for somebody who's in this position thinking they may want to grow, they may want to take advantage of the opportunities that are out there? What do they do? What do they look at? What do they need behind them?
Yeah.
What are you thinking for them?
Look, I think for the most part we've covered a lot of what they need to think about, and that is protect your debtors, consider the creditor management, take care of your inventory. You know, just-in-time ordering at the moment's a good thing. Let's not be caught with stock that we don't really need for projects that aren't going to go ahead. You know, stay ahead of the curve, but not too far ahead of the curve, and really consider your project. But you know, probably the biggest takeaway I want to give to these businesses now, and it goes back to that form of an opportunity. It doesn't matter if you're servicing tier one at the moment, but you can double your workforce and double your labour force to get good people behind you and do some bigger projects, or your one-man band who's trying to push through into your next tier. I think that the takeaway is don't say no to opportunity at the moment, because the opportunity is going to present. So if you're thinking you can't do it because you can't finance it yourself, there is going to be funding opportunities available to you. And we do need to make sure that the business that you've got now and the business that's going to move ahead is going to be sustainable, has got thought been put into it, but funding is going to be available to us, whether that be for working capital and cash cycles, you know, through the likes of leveraging your debtors to help you grow, through the likes of helping you to build out inventory cycles and the stock you need to do your builds. There's many different ways that we can finance it, both with security and without security. So it's cutting through those. So that's probably the takeaway from mine, mate. Don't say no to an opportunity because of capital. You should be thinking of capital to engage the opportunity is probably the takeaway I'm going to give you.
Mate, I love it as a summary. If you see the opportunity, but capital is the problem, don't know how you're going to do that, talk to Zac. He's the man to make that happen. And yeah, guys, just stay safe out there. Keep your stuff, keep everybody in mind, keep your clients in mind. Principles of business 101. Look after your staff, look after your clients. The rest of it will take care of itself.
100%.
Guys, I wish you all the best from my side of things. Stay safe, keep operationally, making sure that you are working to find those efficiencies, take on the opportunities, and all the best with it. Zac, I'll hand it over to you to say hooray and cash out.
Perfect, mate. Back what you said, it's exactly right. Look after your people, look after your clients. They're the two bookends. Everything in the middle, just give some thought to right now, and you'll come out the back end more profitable, more efficient, more productive. So thanks for your time, mate. Good chat.
Good times, mate. Appreciate it.